Michael Harrison's hand trembled as he reached for the pen that would end everything he'd built over 25 years. The lawyer sitting across from him smiled encouragingly, telling him this was his only choice, that signing these papers would save him. But then something strange happened. The young black waitress refilling his water glass suddenly froze, her eyes locked on page 9 of the document. And when she quietly slipped him a folded napkin with just 4 words written on it, everything was about to change in ways nobody in that room could have imagined. Just before we continue, I'd love to know, are you watching from home or on the go? And if you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like these. The conference room at the Grand Oak Club in downtown Chicago felt too cold, even though it was a warm September afternoon outside. Michael sat at a long wooden table that probably cost more money than most people made in an entire year. Everything in this room was expensive: the chairs, the paintings on the walls, even the carpet under his feet felt like it cost a fortune. But none of that mattered anymore. Because in a few minutes, Michael was going to sign papers that would take away his company, his money, and pretty much everything he owned. He was 52 years old, and he looked tired. His suit, which used to fit him perfectly, now hung loose on his shoulders because he'd lost so much weight from stress. His hair had more gray in it than it did 6 months ago. And his eyes, which used to be sharp and focused when he ran his business, now just looked confused and sad. The papers in front of him were organized in neat stacks. Each page had a little color tab sticking out, showing him exactly where he needed to sign his name. There must have been 200 pages total, maybe more. The words on them were hard to understand, lots of legal language that made his head hurt when he tried to read it. Sitting across from him were 4 lawyers. They all wore expensive suits and watches that probably cost as much as a car. They worked for a law firm called Peterson and Associates, and they'd been helping Michael for the past 2 months as his business fell apart. The main lawyer was a man named Donald Peterson. He was about 60 years old with perfectly combed silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Next to him sat his assistant, a younger woman named Rebecca Chan, who always seemed impatient, like she had somewhere more important to be. The other 2 lawyers were quieter. One was named Stephen Miller. He wore glasses and hardly ever spoke. The other was Angela Torres, a red-haired woman who specialized in something called corporate bankruptcy. Michael wasn't even totally sure what that meant, but she'd used those words a lot during their meetings. "Mr. Harrison," Donald said in his smooth, calm voice, "we really need to move forward with this. Time is running out." Michael looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:15 in the afternoon. According to the lawyers, he had until 5 p.m. to sign these papers. After that, something called a creditor's agreement would expire, and things would get even worse for him. "I'm just trying to understand all of this," Michael said quietly. His voice sounded tired. "This is my whole life we're talking about." Rebecca sighed loudly, like she was annoyed. "Mr. Harrison, we've explained everything 3 times already. The terms are very straightforward. You're filing for bankruptcy protection, which will keep your creditors from taking everything you own." "But I'm still losing my company, right?" Michael asked. "Harrison Technologies. The company my father started. The company I've been running for 25 years. Technically, the company will be restructured," Angela explained, using that patient voice adults use when they think someone isn't understanding them. "It will be transferred to a trust that will manage the assets and pay off your debts." Something about the way she said that made Michael uncomfortable, but he couldn't quite figure out why. His brain felt foggy these days, like he was trying to think through mud. 6 months ago, his life had been completely different. Harrison Technologies made computer parts for other companies. Nothing fancy, but it was steady work that made good money. They had offices in Chicago, Dallas, and a smaller operation in Seattle. They employed 300 people. Michael had a nice house in the suburbs, his 2 kids went to good schools, and his wife Linda was planning their 25th wedding anniversary party. Then everything fell apart so fast it made his head spin. First, 3 of his biggest business partners suddenly pulled out of the company, taking their money with them. Michael had worked with these people for over 10 years, considered them friends. But within the same week, all three called him and said they were done. No real explanation, just that they didn't feel confident about the company's direction. Then came the lawsuits. 3 different companies sued Harrison Technologies, claiming they hadn't been paid for services. The weird thing was, Michael thought those bills had been paid. But when he tried to check the bank accounts, he found they'd been frozen. He couldn't access his own company's money. His lawyer at the time, a man named Robert Chin who he'd known for years, had recommended Donald Peterson's law firm to help with the crisis. Robert said they were experts in this kind of situation. Then Robert had quietly stopped returning Michael's phone calls entirely. The media picked up on the story. "Tech company in financial crisis," the headline said. "Harrison Technologies faces multiple lawsuits." Michael's face was on the business news, and not in a good way. His family had to deal with the embarrassment. His daughter came home from school crying because kids were making fun of her. His son got quiet and withdrawn. Linda moved them to their vacation house 2 hours away, just to escape the attention. And Michael sat in meeting after meeting with these lawyers, trying to understand how his successful company had turned into a disaster in just a few months. The conference room door opened quietly, and a young woman entered carrying a tray. She wore the Grand Oak Club's uniform, black pants and a white button-up shirt with the club's logo on the pocket. She was black, probably in her mid-20s, with her hair pulled back neatly. She moved quietly around the room, setting down fresh glasses of water and refilling the coffee pot. Michael noticed she moved carefully, like she was trying not to disturb anyone. That's how service workers were trained at expensive places like this, to be helpful but invisible, there when you needed them but not really noticed as a person. Michael had been a member of the Grand Oak Club for 15 years. He'd eaten hundreds of meals here, attended dozens of meetings, and probably been served by hundreds of different waiters and waitresses. But he never really looked at them as real people with their own lives and problems. They were just there. Part of the background. Now, sitting here about to lose everything, Michael wondered about this young woman. Did she have student loans? Did she have family depending on her? Did she look at people like him and wonder how they got so rich? Did she feel anything when she saw rich people like him losing everything? "Thank you," Michael said quietly as she set a glass of water in front of him. She nodded once, not speaking, and stepped back toward the wall where a small table held extra napkins and sugar packets. "Mr. Harrison," Rebecca's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "We need your signature on page 4. Bottom right corner, where the arrow is pointing." Michael picked up the expensive pen they'd given him. It was heavy, probably cost $100 or more. More than that waitress made in a day of work, he thought randomly. He looked down at page 4. The words seemed to swim in front of his eyes. Liquidation of assets, transfer of holdings, creditor satisfaction under Chapter 11. "What does this mean exactly?" Michael asked, pointing to a line that said something about his Seattle office. "That's just standard language," Donald said smoothly. "It refers to how your various business locations will be categorized in the bankruptcy filing." But the waitress, who had been moving around the table collecting empty coffee cups, paused for just a second. Michael saw her eyes flick down to the paper he was pointing at. It was quick, probably nobody else even noticed, but he saw it. And he saw something else. Her eyebrows pulled together slightly, like she was confused or didn't agree with something. "But it says here that the Seattle operation is listed as closed with 0 value," Michael said, reading more carefully now. "That's not right. We just signed a new contract with a client in Seattle last month. A big one." "That's terminology, Mr. Harrison," Rebecca said quickly. "Don't get caught up in the specific wording. These are legal terms that mean something different than they sound like." The waitress was at Michael's elbow now, setting down his fresh water glass. As she did, her hand brushed against the paper, shifting it slightly on the table. Michael glanced down and saw a different page now visible, one labeled Asset Transfer Schedule. His eyes caught on a line that said, Transfer to Riverside Management Trust pending approval. What's Riverside Management Trust? Michael asked. The lawyers exchanged quick glances. It happened fast, but Michael saw it. They hadn't expected him to notice that page. That's the trust we mentioned, Angela said. It's the entity that will manage your assets during the bankruptcy process. But who controls the trust? Michael pressed. It's overseen by the bankruptcy court. Stephen spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet. Overseen by the court, but who actually runs it? Who makes the decisions? Mr. Harrison. Donald stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. We have exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes left. That's not a lot of time to review, sign, and file all these documents with the court. I strongly suggest we focus on completing the signature process rather than getting bogged down in minor technical details. Minor technical details about who's going to control everything I own doesn't seem that minor to me, Michael said. He could feel something starting to shift in his chest. It felt like anger. Real anger, for the first time in months. He'd been so beaten down, so overwhelmed, that he'd stopped fighting. But now something was waking up inside him. The waitress had moved back to her position by the wall. Michael looked at her, and for just a moment their eyes met. And in that moment, he saw something he recognized. It was the same look he'd had in business meetings 1,000 times. The look of someone who knows something is wrong but isn't sure if they should speak up about it. Excuse me, Michael said to her directly. You were looking at the papers. Did you see something? Every head in the room turned to stare at the waitress. She looked startled, like a deer caught in headlights. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to read your private documents, she said quietly. That's quite all right, Donald said coldly. But perhaps you should return to the kitchen now. This is a private legal meeting. No, Michael said firmly. I asked her a question. Did you see something on those papers that seemed wrong to you? The waitress looked at Michael, then at the lawyers, then back at Michael. He could see her struggling with something, fear of getting in trouble versus wanting to tell the truth. Finally, she took a small breath and spoke. I'm not a lawyer or anything. I'm just a waitress. But that line about the Seattle operation being closed? I served lunch here last week to some people from your Seattle office. They were celebrating because they just got a new contract. They said it was worth $2 million. They were really happy about it. The room went completely silent. Michael felt something click in his brain. A $2 million contract. But these papers say the Seattle office is worth $0. Mr. Harrison. Rebecca stood up quickly. This young woman has no idea what she's talking about. She overheard part of a conversation while serving food. That's not the same as understanding complex financial documents. But if the Seattle office just got a $2 million contract, why would it be listed as worthless? Michael asked. Because in bankruptcy accounting, you have to consider debts against assets, Angela explained. The Seattle office might have revenue, but if it also has debts and operational costs, the net value could be $0. That's not how asset valuation works in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the waitress said quietly. Everyone stared at her again. I'm sorry, she continued, her voice a little shaky but growing stronger. I didn't mean to interrupt. But I study business law at Chicago Community College. I've taken classes in accounting and bankruptcy procedures. When you file Chapter 11, individual business locations with their own operations are supposed to be valued separately from the parent company's debts, unless there's direct liability transfer. And I don't see that listed anywhere on that page. Michael looked at this young woman, this waitress he'd barely noticed, with completely new eyes. You study business law? Yes, sir. I'm working toward my degree. I take classes at night and on weekends when I'm not working here. How do you know about Chapter 11 bankruptcy procedures? Angela asked sharply. It was covered in my business organizations class last semester. We had to learn about different types of corporate structures and how they're handled in bankruptcy. Donald's face had turned red. This is completely inappropriate. Mr. Harrison, we cannot have restaurant staff providing you with legal advice. This could compromise the entire proceeding. I'm not trying to give advice, the waitress said quickly. I'm just saying that the numbers don't seem to match what I know happened. And, she hesitated, then continued, there's something else. That page about Riverside Management Trust? I've heard that name before. Where? Michael asked. In my corporate law class. We did a case study about something called bankruptcy acquisition vehicles. They're a way for companies to buy other companies cheap when they're in trouble. Riverside Management Trust was one of the examples we studied. Michael felt his heart start to pound. Are you saying this trust isn't just managing my assets? It's buying them? That's a gross oversimplification, Rebecca said loudly. You're taking the confused recollection of a college class and applying it to a complex legal situation you don't understand. But Michael wasn't listening to her anymore. He was flipping through the papers, really reading them now instead of just skimming over words that made his head hurt. On page 17, he found something that made his blood run cold. In small print at the bottom of a section about asset distribution, it said, primary creditor North Star Capital shall retain controlling interest in restructured assets. Who is North Star Capital? Michael asked. Silence. I asked a question. Who is North Star Capital? They're one of your creditors, Donald finally said. They hold some of your company's debt. How much? That's complicated. How much? Stephen cleared his throat. Approximately 40% of your outstanding debt. Michael's hands started shaking. And this says they get controlling interest in my restructured assets. That means they'd own my company. It's more nuanced than that. Angela started. Who owns North Star Capital? Michael interrupted. Nobody answered. Michael turned to the waitress. What was your name? Keisha. Keisha Washington. Keisha, do you have your phone with you? Yes, sir. Can you look up who owns North Star Capital? Keisha pulled out her phone and typed quickly. After a moment, her eyes widened. It says here that North Star Capital is a subsidiary of Bennett Holdings Group. Michael felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Victor Bennett. The lawyers didn't say anything, but their faces told him everything he needed to know. Victor Bennett. The business partner Michael had forced out of Harrison Technologies 8 years ago. Victor had wanted to cut corners, use cheaper materials that didn't meet quality standards, lay off half their workers to increase short-term profits. Michael had refused, and when Victor wouldn't back down, Michael had bought out his shares and removed him from the board. Victor had been furious. He'd told Michael he'd regret it. But that was 8 years ago. Michael thought it was ancient history. Apparently not. Let me see if I understand this correctly, Michael said slowly, his voice shaking with anger. Victor Bennett bought up my company's debt. Then somehow my business partners all quit at the same time. Then lawsuits appeared and my bank accounts got frozen. Then you, he pointed at the lawyers, showed up to help me by getting me to sign papers that would transfer my company to a trust that Victor controls. Is that about right? That's a conspiracy theory with no basis in fact, Donald said coldly. You're being paranoid and emotional, which frankly supports our concern about your mental state. Your concern about my what? Mr. Harrison, you're clearly not thinking rationally. You're creating elaborate fantasies based on the confused observations of a waitress who took a couple of community college classes. If you refuse to sign these papers, we'll have no choice but to file for a competency evaluation. A what? A hearing where a judge determines if you're mentally capable of making your own financial decisions. If the judge agrees you're not, a court-appointed guardian will make decisions for you, including signing these bankruptcy papers. Michael stood up so fast his chair almost fell over. Get out. Excuse me? Donald looked genuinely shocked. I said get out. All of you. This meeting is over. Rebecca grabbed for the papers on the table. These documents are our work product. These are documents about my company, my assets, my life. Michael said loudly. They stay right here. Now get out before I call security. For a moment, Michael thought Donald might actually try to take the papers by force. The older lawyer's hand twitched toward the stack. But something in Michael's face must have convinced him not to try it. You're making a catastrophic mistake, Donald said as he picked up his briefcase. In 1 hour and 37 minutes, that creditor agreement expires. After that, every creditor you have will come after you individually. They'll take your house, your cars, your wife's jewelry, your kids' college funds. Everything. And it will all be because you listened to a waitress instead of experienced attorneys. I'd rather lose everything to honest creditors than give it away to thieves in expensive suits. Michael shot back. The lawyers left, slamming the door behind them. And suddenly the room was very quiet. Michael sank back into his chair, his heart pounding. Had he just made the worst mistake of his life? Or had he narrowly avoided disaster? Keisha still stood by the wall, looking uncertain. Thank you, Michael said to her. I don't even know if what you told me is right, but thank you for speaking up when you could have just stayed quiet and kept your job. I probably did lose my job, Keisha said with a small, sad smile. The club manager is going to fire me for interfering in a member's private meeting. Then I'll make sure you're taken care of. Michael promised. You might have just saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. Keisha walked over to the table and looked at the papers spread out there. Can I ask you something, Mr. Harrison? Call me Michael. And yes, ask anything. Do you have a lawyer you trust? Someone who's not connected to this firm. I don't know who to trust anymore. Everyone I thought I could trust either disappeared or turned out to be working against me. Keisha pulled out her phone again. My business law professor used to be a corporate attorney before she started teaching. She always told our class that if we ever needed real legal help, she had friends in the field who actually cared about doing the right thing. She started typing. Maybe she knows someone who can help you. Keisha, why are you doing this? You don't know me. For all you know, I deserve what's happening. Keisha stopped typing and looked at him directly. Maybe you do deserve some of it. I don't know your whole story. But I know my mama lost everything to people who lied to her with fancy papers she couldn't understand. Lawyers and bankers who smiled while they stole from her. I was 14, and I watched her cry when we lost our house. I promised myself that day that I'd learn how all these systems work so I could help people understand when they're being cheated. She went back to her phone. My professor just texted back. She says she knows someone, a lawyer named Jennifer Rodriguez who fights corporate fraud cases. She's 30 minutes away and willing to meet with you right now. Michael looked at the clock. 1 hour and 33 minutes until everything fell apart. Tell her I'll meet her in the lobby in 5 minutes, Michael said. The lobby of the Grand Oak Club looked like something from a movie about rich people. Giant crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the floor was made of marble so shiny you could see your reflection in it. Men and women in expensive business suits walked through, talking on their phones or heading to meetings. Michael stood near the entrance, holding the stack of bankruptcy papers under his arm. His phone kept buzzing with angry text messages from Donald Peterson. The first message said, Mr. Harrison, please reconsider. We're still willing to help you. The second said, You're running out of time. The creditor agreement expires in 87 minutes. The third was different. I've filed an emergency petition with the court. Judge Barbara Wilson will decide tomorrow morning if you're mentally competent to make your own decisions. See you in court. Michael's hands started shaking as he read that last message. They were actually trying to have him declared mentally incompetent. If they succeeded, a stranger appointed by the court would take over all his decisions, including signing those bankruptcy papers. The front doors opened, and a woman walked in with quick, purposeful steps. She was Latina, probably in her early 40s, wearing a navy blue pantsuit that looked professional but not fancy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she carried a leather briefcase that had clearly seen a lot of use. Michael Harrison? She called out, looking around the lobby. That's me, Michael said, walking over to meet her. Jennifer Rodriguez, she said, shaking his hand firmly. Professor Martinez said you needed help with a bankruptcy filing that wasn't what it appeared to be. She said it was urgent. That's putting it mildly. I have 85 minutes before a creditor agreement expires and everything I own becomes fair game for lawsuits. Jennifer's eyebrows went up. Then we'd better talk fast. Is there somewhere private we can go? Michael led her to a small meeting room on the second floor. As they walked, he saw Keisha clearing tables in the main dining room. She looked up, saw him, and gave a small, hopeful smile. He nodded back, grateful all over again that she'd had the courage to speak up. In the meeting room, Michael spread the bankruptcy papers across the table. Jennifer pulled out reading glasses and started going through them quickly, her finger tracking lines of text while her other hand took notes on a legal pad. This is clever, Jennifer said after about 5 minutes of reading. And by clever, I mean criminally fraudulent. Can you explain it in simple terms? Michael asked. The legal language makes my head spin. Jennifer nodded. Okay, imagine you have a piggy bank with $100 in it. But you owe some people money. Let's say you owe $50 total to different friends. You're having trouble paying them back all at once, so you need help figuring out a payment plan. Okay, I'm following so far, Michael said. Now imagine someone comes along and says, I'll help you. Give me your piggy bank, and I'll make sure your friends get paid. That sounds helpful, right? Right. But what this person doesn't tell you is that they're actually friends with one of the people you owe money to. And their plan is to say your piggy bank only has $20 in it instead of $100. Then they'll give that friend the whole piggy bank for just $20, which means that friend gets $100 for only paying $20. Michael felt sick to his stomach. And that's what these papers do? Exactly. Your company, Harrison Technologies, is the piggy bank. Victor Bennett bought up most of your debts for cheap. These bankruptcy papers make it look like your company is worth way less than it really is. Then Bennett's trust gets to buy it for that fake low price. You lose everything, and he gets your company for maybe 20 cents on every dollar it's actually worth. But that's illegal, isn't it? Absolutely. It's fraud. But it's fraud dressed up in complicated legal language that most people can't understand. If you'd signed these papers, by the time you figured out what happened, it would have been too late to fight it. Michael put his head in his hands. I almost signed them. I was about 10 seconds away from handing Victor everything when Keisha, the waitress, stopped me. Then you owe her your life, Jennifer said seriously. Because this would have destroyed you. Can we stop it? Is there a way to fight back? Jennifer looked at the clock on the wall. We can't stop the creditor agreement from expiring. But we can file an emergency motion with the bankruptcy court claiming fraud. If we can convince a judge to look at this evidence, we can get a temporary restraining order that freezes any asset transfers until the court investigates. Will it work? It depends on the judge and how good our evidence is. I'm going to need you to tell me everything. How did your business partners suddenly quit? How did these lawsuits appear? How did your accounts get frozen? We need to show a pattern of deliberate manipulation. For the next 45 minutes, Michael told Jennifer everything. About how his 3 business partners, Sarah Mitchell, James Wu, and Carlos Hernandez, had all pulled out within the same week, even though they'd worked together for over a decade. About the lawsuits from companies claiming they hadn't been paid, even though Michael was sure those bills had been handled. About his bank accounts being frozen for suspicious activity that nobody would explain. About his previous lawyer Robert Chin recommending Donald Peterson's firm, and then disappearing. Jennifer wrote everything down, asking sharp questions that helped Michael remember details he'd forgotten. This was planned for months, maybe years, Jennifer said when he finished. Victor didn't just get angry and decide to hurt you. He carefully built a trap and waited for the perfect moment to spring it. So what do we do? Jennifer pulled out her phone and started typing fast. I'm emailing my paralegal right now. We need to prepare an emergency filing for the court. We'll need your financial records, communication logs, anything that shows the pattern of manipulation. The bankruptcy court judge is named Thomas Chin, no relation to your old lawyer. He's tough but fair. If we can get in front of him, we have a shot." Michael's phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. The text message made him feel cold all over. "Mr. Harrison, this is Judge Barbara Wilson's clerk. Your former legal counsel has filed an emergency petition for a competency evaluation. A hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the courthouse. You are required to appear." He showed the message to Jennifer. Her jaw tightened. They're moving fast. Competency hearings are their nuclear option. If they can convince Judge Wilson you're not mentally capable of making decisions, she'll appoint a guardian to manage your affairs. And that guardian will probably just sign the bankruptcy papers for you. Can they actually do that? Can they take away my right to make my own choices? They can try. The legal standard is high. They have to prove you're genuinely unable to understand your own situation. But with the right judge and enough pressure, sometimes these things go the wrong way. Jennifer looked at Michael carefully. "Have you ever been in therapy or treatment for any mental health issues?" "I saw a counselor 3 years ago when my dad died. Just grief counseling, maybe 6 sessions total. They'll try to use that. They'll say you have a history of depression affecting your judgment. We'll need to get our own psychiatric evaluation to prove you're thinking clearly." "This is insane," Michael said. "I ask reasonable questions about suspicious documents, and suddenly I'm being treated like I'm crazy? Welcome to how powerful people fight when you challenge them," Jennifer said grimly. "They can't win on facts, so they attack your credibility instead." She checked her watch. "Okay, the creditor agreement expires in 18 minutes. Here's what's going to happen. The moment that deadline hits, your phone is going to explode with calls and messages from creditors and lawyers, maybe even media reporters. Don't answer any of them. Send everything to me. As of right now, I'm your attorney." She pulled a document from her briefcase and slid it across the table with a pen. "This is a standard representation agreement. My usual retainer is $20,000, but given that your accounts are frozen, I'll take whatever you can access now and we'll work out the rest later." Michael quickly read the document. It was straightforward and honest, nothing like the confusing papers Donald Peterson had tried to get him to sign. "I can probably get you $10,000 from an emergency account my wife Linda set up in her name. Would that work?" "That works. Sign here and here." Michael signed both copies and pushed them back across the table. "Now, about tomorrow's competency hearing," Jennifer continued. "They'll argue that you're being paranoid, refusing good legal advice, and showing poor judgment. We'll argue that you were asking valid questions about fraudulent documents. Keisha's testimony will be crucial. If she can establish that you were being reasonable and the lawyers were being evasive, it supports your mental competence. Keisha already lost her job because of this," Michael said. "Is it fair to ask her to risk even more? That's up to her. But my guess is she'll want to testify." She didn't speak up just to stop halfway. As if on cue, there was a soft knock on the door. Michael opened it to find Keisha standing there, still in her work uniform. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but the club manager just fired me. He said I was terminated for interfering in club member business. Security is packing up my locker and I have to leave in 10 minutes. Her voice was steady, but Michael could see tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay before I left." "Come in," Jennifer said immediately. "I'm Jennifer Rodriguez, Michael's attorney. We were just talking about you." Keisha stepped inside, looking nervous. "First of all," Jennifer said, "what you did took real courage. You risked your job to tell the truth, and that matters." "I just said what I saw," Keisha said quietly. "Which is exactly what we need you to do in court tomorrow. There's going to be a hearing where Michael's former lawyers tried to claim he's not mentally competent to make his own decisions. Your testimony could prove that Michael was asking smart questions and they were giving dishonest answers. Would you be willing to testify?" Keisha looked at Michael, then back at Jennifer. "Will it help? It could make the difference between Michael keeping control of his life or losing everything to people who are stealing from him." Then yes. I'll testify. You need to understand, Jennifer said seriously. These are powerful people who are going to be very angry at you. They might try to hurt your reputation. They might make it hard for you to find another job. It could get ugly. Keisha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My mama used to tell me, baby, doing the right thing ain't always easy, but that's what makes it the right thing. I've already lost my job. Might as well make it count for something. Michael felt a lump in his throat. This young woman who he'd barely noticed an hour ago was putting everything on the line for a stranger. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of, he promised. When this is over, win or lose, I'll help you finish your degree. No strings attached. You've earned it. I don't want charity, Keisha said firmly. I want to earn my own way. It's not charity. It's payment for expert consulting services, Jennifer said with a small smile. You provided crucial analysis that potentially saved Michael from fraud. That's worth compensation. Before Keisha could respond, Michael's phone started buzzing continuously. Text messages and calls started pouring in as the creditor agreement officially expired. The first call was from a law firm representing one of the creditors. The message was cold and formal. Mr. Harrison, we are filing a lawsuit to recover the $2.3 million you owe our client. We will be seeking to attach all available assets, including your primary residence. The second was from a different firm. This is to inform you that we are initiating collection proceedings for the outstanding debt of $1.8 million. We will be contacting your wife and pursuing all available legal remedies. The messages kept coming, one after another. It felt like sharks circling now that they smelled blood in the water. Jennifer reached over and took the phone from Michael's shaking hands. She turned it face down on the table. Let them wait. We have work to do. The next morning came too quickly. Michael had barely slept, lying awake in a hotel room. He couldn't face going home and seeing Linda's worried face, going over everything in his mind. Had he made the right choice? Should he have just signed the papers and accepted his fate? But every time he thought that, he remembered Keisha's face when she noticed the discrepancy in the documents. The way her eyes had widened with recognition. The courage it took for her to speak up when staying silent would have been so much safer. At 8:30 a.m., Michael stood outside the courthouse in downtown Chicago. It was a cold, rainy October morning, and the gray sky matched his mood perfectly. He held an umbrella that wasn't doing much to keep him dry. Jennifer met him on the courthouse steps, carrying her battle-worn briefcase and wearing the same navy pantsuit from yesterday. She looked like she hadn't slept much either, but her eyes were sharp and focused. I've filed our counter-motion alleging fraud, she told him. Judge Chin won't see it until this afternoon, but it's officially in the system. Now we just have to survive this competency hearing and keep you in control of your own decisions. What are our chances? Honest answer? 50-50. Judge Wilson is unpredictable. Some days she's sympathetic to people in tough situations. Other days she thinks everyone is trying to game the system. Jennifer looked at him seriously. The most important thing is that you stay calm. Answer questions directly and honestly. Don't get defensive or angry, even if they try to provoke you. They went inside and rode the elevator to the 4th floor. The courthouse hallways were crowded with lawyers and people waiting for their cases to be called. Everything smelled like old coffee and floor wax. In the hallway outside courtroom 4B, Michael saw Donald Peterson and his team of lawyers. They stood in a cluster, talking quietly and looking confident. Behind them, sitting on a bench like he was watching a show, was Victor Bennett himself. Michael hadn't seen Victor in 8 years. He looked older now, his hair was completely gray, and he'd gained weight. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating. When he saw Michael, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they'd already won. Don't react, Jennifer whispered. That's what he wants. Then Michael saw Keisha coming down the hallway. She wore a simple black dress and looked nervous but determined. When she reached them, Jennifer quickly went over what to expect. You'll be sworn in and asked to tell what you saw. Just tell the truth exactly as it happened. Donald Peterson's team will try to make you seem unqualified or confused. Don't let them rattle you. Remember, you were right about the Seattle office, and the documents prove it. Okay, Keisha said, taking a deep breath. I can do this. The courtroom doors opened, and everyone filed inside. The courtroom was smaller and plainer than Michael had expected from TV shows. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, and an American flag in the corner. Judge Barbara Wilson entered from a door behind the bench, a stern-looking woman in her 50s with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back tight. Be seated, she said. Her voice was no-nonsense, like a teacher who dealt with too many troublemakers. Let's be clear about what we're doing here. This is a competency evaluation hearing, not a trial. Mr. Peterson, you filed a petition claiming your former client is mentally unfit to make financial decisions. That's a serious claim. I want to hear your evidence, and then I'll hear from Mr. Harrison and his new attorney. Keep it factual. I have 6 other cases today. Donald stood up, radiating professional confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. The evidence is straightforward. Mr. Harrison was presented with a comprehensive bankruptcy filing prepared by experienced attorneys after weeks of careful analysis. This filing represented his only realistic option to protect his remaining assets. At the last moment, based on input from a restaurant waitress with no legal credentials, Mr. Harrison refused to sign. He dismissed his legal team and now claims a conspiracy that has no basis in reality. A restaurant waitress? Judge Wilson looked at Keisha with raised eyebrows. A student of business law who identified multiple fraudulent elements in the documents. Jennifer stood up to respond. Elements that constitute criminal conspiracy to commit fraud through false bankruptcy filings. The courtroom got very quiet. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Wilson said. I hope you have evidence. I do, Your Honor. May I call our witness? Judge Wilson nodded. Keisha was sworn in and took her seat in the witness box. Michael could see her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady when Jennifer asked her to tell the court what she'd observed. Keisha described serving in the private dining room, overhearing the lawyers pressuring Michael to sign without really explaining the documents. She explained about her business law classes at Chicago Community College and how she'd learned to read corporate documents. I noticed that the papers listed the Seattle office as closed with 0 value, Keisha said. But I'd served lunch just a week before to people from that office. They were celebrating because they just signed a big new contract, $2 million. They were talking about hiring more people and expanding. That didn't make sense with what the papers said. And what happened when you pointed this out? Jennifer asked. The lawyers tried to dismiss me. They said I didn't know what I was talking about because I'm just a waitress. When Mr. Harrison asked them to explain the discrepancy, they got angry. They said he was being stupid for asking questions. They threatened to leave him with no legal help if he didn't sign right away. Donald stood up for cross-examination. His smile was sharp and cold. Ms. Washington, you study business law at a community college. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Not law school. Not even a 4-year university. Community college. That's where I can afford to go to school, Keisha said evenly. But the information is still accurate. But you're significantly less qualified than the 4 attorneys who prepared those documents, aren't you? We have 87 combined years of legal experience. You have what, 2 years of night classes? Michael saw Keisha's jaw tighten, but her voice stayed calm. I have 2 years of learning to read what's actually written instead of just trusting that powerful people are telling the truth. And in this case, what was written didn't match reality. Some people in the courtroom gallery murmured. Judge Wilson banged her gavel once. Order. Donald continued. You claim the Seattle office is worth $2 million based on overhearing a conversation while serving lunch. That's hearsay, Ms. Washington. You have no documentation, no proof. I have proof, Jennifer said, standing up. She handed a stack of papers to the judge. This is the contract the Seattle office signed 3 weeks ago. $2 million over 2 years with Cascade Manufacturing. It's a matter of public record. The Seattle office is not only active but profitable. Donald's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Judge Wilson read through the contract, her eyebrows rising. Mr. Peterson, can you explain why a profitable office with a $2 million contract would be listed as having zero value in your bankruptcy filing? Your Honor, as I explained to Mr. Harrison, when you factor in operational costs and debt obligations, the net value. That's not how asset valuation works in Chapter 11, Keisha said from the witness stand. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm sorry, she said quickly. But in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, offices with their own operations are valued separately from parent company debts unless there's specific liability transfer. I don't see that anywhere in the documents. Judge Wilson leaned forward. Ms. Washington, can you specifically identify what elements you believe constituted fraud? Keisha nodded and pulled out notes she'd made. 3 main things, Your Honor. First, the asset reclassification page listed active parts of the business as closed with zero value. That artificially made the company seem worth way less than it really was. Second, the trust structure, Riverside Management Trust, was set up to receive the assets, but the documents didn't disclose that Riverside is controlled by North Star Capital, which bought up Mr. Harrison's debts at huge discounts. Third, the fee structure for the trust administrators had no limit, which means they could take as much as they wanted before giving anything to Mr. Harrison. She looked directly at Donald as she continued. Put together, these elements create a system where Mr. Harrison signs away his assets to a trust controlled by his enemy, Victor Bennett. The assets get valued at fake low prices, and the trust operators take most of what's left in fees. Mr. Harrison would lose everything while his creditors, who are actually Victor Bennett, get to buy his company for maybe 20 cents on the dollar. That's not bankruptcy protection. That's theft dressed up in legal language. The silence that followed felt heavy. Judge Wilson was writing notes, her expression unreadable. Donald had lost his confident smile completely. In the gallery, Victor Bennett looked like a man watching his careful plans fall apart. Mr. Peterson, Judge Wilson said without looking up from her notes, I'm going to need you to explain the relationship between your firm and North Star Capital. And I'm going to need complete documentation of the Riverside Management Trust structure. Your Honor, those are confidential client materials. Not anymore, they're not. Judge Wilson's voice was ice cold. This court is now investigating potential fraud and bankruptcy proceedings. You will produce all documents related to Riverside Management Trust, North Star Capital, and any communications with Victor Bennett within 48 hours, or I will hold you in contempt. She turned to Jennifer. Ms. Rodriguez, file your formal fraud complaint with supporting documentation. I'm ordering a full forensic review of these bankruptcy documents and freezing all asset transfers pending investigation. Then she looked at Michael. Mr. Harrison, the competency petition is denied. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of reasonable caution I'd want to see from someone facing complex financial decisions. Asking hard questions about documents that may be fraudulent isn't evidence of mental incompetence. It's evidence of basic intelligence. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Michael felt his knees go weak with relief. Keisha stepped down from the witness stand, looking shaky. Jennifer was already packing up her briefcase, a small, satisfied smile on her face. In the gallery, Donald Peterson and his team of lawyers gathered their things with tight, angry faces. Victor Bennett stood up and walked out without looking at anyone, his expression cold and calculating. We won, Michael said quietly, still not quite believing it. We won this round, Jennifer corrected. But they're not going to give up. Victor Bennett spent years planning this revenge. He's going to fight back hard. Outside the courtroom, Keisha leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. I can't believe I just did that. I testified in court against a team of lawyers. You did more than that, Michael said. You saved my life. Again. What happens now? Keisha asked. Now we build the counterattack, Jennifer said. fraud charges, conspiracy, legal malpractice, breach of fiduciary duty. We're going after everyone involved. And Keisha, you're going to be a key witness in all of it. Are you prepared for that? Keisha thought about her lost job, her uncertain future, the powerful enemies she just made. She thought about her mother and how she'd lost everything to people in expensive suits who'd smiled while they stole. I'm prepared, she said firmly. Let's make sure they understand that just because someone's a waitress doesn't mean they're powerless. 3 months later. The real trial happened in January, 3 months after that first competency hearing. The media had picked up the story with hungry interest. Waitress exposes billion-dollar fraud. The headline said, Law firm conspiracy to steal tech company. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious observers. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table with Jennifer, feeling more clear-headed than he had in a year. The fog of confusion and despair that had clouded his mind for months was gone. Keisha sat in the witness area, wearing a simple gray dress. She'd been interviewed by reporters, featured in news stories, even invited to speak on a podcast about corporate fraud. But she'd kept most of the attention at arm's length, focusing on her studies and preparing for her testimony. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Financial experts testified about how the asset valuations in the bankruptcy documents had been deliberately falsified. A forensic accountant walked the jury through the money trail, showing how Victor Bennett's North Star Capital had bought up Michael's debts cheap, then positioned itself to acquire his company through the Riverside Trust structure. Robert Chin, Michael's former attorney, testified with obvious reluctance. Yes, he'd referred Michael to Donald Peterson's firm. Yes, Donald had contacted him first, suggesting the referral. Yes, he'd received a $20,000 finder's fee for the referral, though he claimed he hadn't known it was part of Victor's scheme. Michael's former business partners took the stand one by one. Sarah Mitchell admitted she'd been approached by Victor with an offer to buy out her stake in Harrison Technologies at above-market rates, but only if she withdrew immediately and publicly. James Wu had received a similar offer. Carlos Hernandez broke down crying on the stand, admitting he'd known something was wrong but had been too afraid of losing his own money to ask questions. But the most damaging testimony came from Stephen Miller, the quiet lawyer with glasses who'd barely spoken during that first meeting. Offered immunity in exchange for cooperation, he turned on his colleagues with devastating details. Donald told us the plan 6 months before we approached Mr. Harrison, Stephen said quietly. Victor Bennett wanted revenge for being forced out years ago. He'd been buying up Harrison's debts quietly, waiting for the right moment. When market conditions created some financial pressure on Harrison Technologies, Victor saw his opportunity. What was your role? The prosecutor asked. Donald coordinated everything. The partner withdrawals, the lawsuits, the credit freezes, it was all designed to push Mr. Harrison into a corner where bankruptcy seemed like his only option. The bankruptcy documents were structured to look like protection but actually facilitate a hostile takeover. Mr. Harrison would have signed away controlling interest to a trust that Victor controlled. He would have gotten his company for maybe 20 cents on the dollar. Why did you participate? Stephen's voice cracked. Because Donald said it was legal. Aggressive but legal. Corporate warfare, not fraud. By the time I understood what we were really doing, I was too deep to back out without destroying my own career. The defense tried to rehabilitate him, suggesting he was lying to save himself. But the documentation backed up his story. Emails between Donald and Victor discussing strategy. Wire transfers showing payments to Michael's former partners. Communication logs proving the lawsuits had been coordinated. Donald Peterson himself testified, maintaining that everything he'd done was standard bankruptcy practice. But when the prosecutor showed him an email where he'd written to Victor, "The target is almost ready. Just need to maintain pressure until he signs," Donald's professional composure finally cracked. "That was just a figure of speech," he said weakly. "A figure of speech describing what, Mr. Peterson? What target? What pressure?" Donald had no good answer. Victor Bennett chose not to testify. His lawyers advised against it. But his presence in the courtroom every day told its own story. This wasn't some distant business maneuver. This was personal revenge, planned carefully over years. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back, the verdict was clear. Guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty of criminal misrepresentation. Guilty of breach of fiduciary duty. Donald Peterson's law license was immediately suspended. He would later be disbarred and face criminal charges. Victor Bennett was convicted of fraud and conspiracy, facing both criminal penalties and civil liability that would consume most of his fortune. The other lawyers involved received various penalties, their legal careers effectively over. As the verdicts were read, Michael sat very still. This was vindication. Justice. But it was also a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything to people he trusted. After the trial, Michael stood on the courthouse steps with Jennifer and Keisha, facing a crowd of reporters. "Mr. Harrison, how does it feel to have justice?" one reporter called out. "It feels like I got a second chance I almost didn't get," Michael said honestly. "If Keisha Washington hadn't had the courage to speak up, I would have lost everything. She saw what experienced lawyers either missed or chose to ignore." "Keisha, what made you decide to get involved?" another reporter asked. Keisha thought carefully before answering. "My mama always told me that staying silent when you see something wrong is the same as helping it happen. I saw something wrong, and I couldn't just pretend I didn't notice. Even if it cost me. What's next for you?" "I'm finishing my degree at Chicago Community College. After that, I'm applying to law schools. I want to help people who are in situations like my mother was, facing documents they don't understand, being taken advantage of by people who use their knowledge as a weapon." 1 year later, Keisha sat in a coffee shop near Chicago Community College, her laptop open in front of her, working through case studies for her business ethics class. She'd graduate next month with her associate degree, and she'd already been accepted to Northwestern Law School with a full scholarship. The scholarship had come with a personal letter from the dean, mentioning her extraordinary demonstration of ethical courage and analytical ability in the Harrison Technologies case. Her phone buzzed with a text from her study group, asking if she could meet Thursday to review for finals. Keisha smiled and typed back yes. Life was different now. The media attention had faded after a few months, the way it always did. Keisha had done some interviews, told her story, then quietly stepped back from the spotlight. She didn't need to be famous. She just needed to finish her education and build a career helping people. The coffee shop door opened, and Michael Harrison walked in. He looked healthier than he had in over a year. He'd gained back the weight he'd lost, and his eyes were clear and focused. His company, Harrison Technologies, had been fully restored to him after the trial. With Victor's conspiracy exposed and the fraudulent debts dismissed, Michael's business was actually stronger than before. "Sorry I'm late," Michael said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Traffic was terrible." "No problem. How's the restructuring going?" Michael had spent the past year rebuilding his company from the ground up, implementing new oversight systems and ethical guidelines. "Good. Really good, actually. The Seattle office just signed another major contract. Turns out accurately representing your assets makes it easier to do business." Keisha laughed. "I wanted to update you on something," Michael continued. "We're implementing a new corporate policy. Every major contract and legal filing has to be reviewed by an independent ethics team that includes people from different backgrounds and education levels. No more echo chambers where everyone thinks the same way. That's smart. Different perspectives catch things that groupthink misses." "Exactly. I learned that lesson the hard way." Michael's expression turned serious. "I also wanted to give you this." He slid an envelope across the table. Keisha looked at it warily. "If this is more money." "It's not. It's a job offer. Not for now, but for after you graduate law school. Harrison Technologies is creating a new division focused on corporate accountability and ethical business practices. We need someone to run it. Someone who understands how systems can be abused and isn't afraid to challenge authority. Michael, I haven't even finished my bachelor's degree yet. Which is why this is an offer for 3 years from now, minimum. After law school. But I wanted you to know the option exists. You'd have full autonomy, direct access to the board, and the authority to investigate anything that concerns you. Keisha picked up the envelope but didn't open it. I'll think about it. But you need to understand, if I take this job, I won't do it because I'm grateful. I'll do it because it's important work, not because I owe you something. Good, Michael said simply. Gratitude makes terrible motivation for the kind of work I'm describing. But conviction? That makes excellent motivation. And you've got plenty of that. They talked for another hour about lighter things. Michael's daughter had gotten into her first-choice college. His wife Linda had started a foundation to help families dealing with financial fraud. He'd learned to delegate more, trust more carefully, and actually listen to people he might have once dismissed. Keisha told him about her classes, her study group, the new apartment she'd moved into now that she didn't have to work 2 jobs while going to school. Small things, normal things, the kind of progress that mattered more than headlines. When they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Keisha felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about building something bigger, systems that protected people instead of exploiting them. Structures where truth could be spoken without costing everything. She walked through Chicago with the envelope in her bag and her laptop over her shoulder. Just another student in a city full of students. But she knew something most of them hadn't learned yet. Power wasn't permanent. Intelligence wasn't reserved for people with expensive degrees. And sometimes the most important voice in the room was the one nobody expected to hear. 3 years later, graduation day. Keisha Washington walked across the stage at Northwestern Law School's graduation ceremony, accepting her law degree with honors. In the audience, Michael Harrison and Jennifer Rodriguez applauded alongside Keisha's mother, who'd made the trip from their hometown despite her health issues. Her mother was crying, happy tears this time. Not like those years ago, when they'd lost everything. After graduation, Keisha spent 2 years at a nonprofit legal clinic specializing in consumer fraud cases. She won more cases than she lost, built a reputation for thorough analysis and fearless advocacy, and learned how to fight for people who couldn't afford to fight for themselves. And then, when the time was right, she opened the envelope Michael had given her that day in the coffee shop. The offer was still there, still waiting. Director of Corporate Ethics and Accountability at Harrison Technologies. Full autonomy, board access, the power to investigate and expose wrongdoing from inside a major corporation. Keisha accepted the position with one condition: she could continue taking cases on the side, helping people facing the same predatory practices that had destroyed